You're not invited. That was her only sentence, and my breaking point. The morning started like any other. Coffee brewing, bacon sizzling, and my wife, Danielle, flipping through her phone with that usual distracted smile. I was pouring my second cup when she looked up casually and said, "Oh, Ava's wedding will be really small. Just family. She thinks it'll be easier if you don't come." I froze. Easier? I set the mug down slower than I should have, the ceramic clinking against the counter like punctuation to a sentence I never saw coming. "Easier for who?" I asked, my voice already tighter than I wanted it to be. Danielle didn't even flinch, didn't look up, just shrugged and returned to scrolling, like I'd asked what was for dinner. Let me be clear. I raised Ava since she was in kindergarten. Her dad skipped out before she lost her first tooth. I was the one who taught her how to ride a bike, who's staying up all night during flu seasons, who drove 3 hours for a soccer game she barely played in. I paid for the braces, helped her with college essays, sat beside her when she couldn't stop crying after her first heartbreak. But suddenly, on the biggest day of her life, I was a complication. I wanted to shout, wanted to demand an answer, but I didn't. Because I've learned that sometimes silence hurts more than any raised voice ever could. I walked out of that kitchen, packed the duffel bag, and booked a cabin halfway across the world. In Iceland. Remote, quiet, cold. Perfect. No explanation, no goodbye, just a note on the fridge. Gone for a while. Don't call unless it's an emergency. I knew what would happen. Danielle would spin it like I was being dramatic. Ava would let her. And they'd both pretend I just needed space. But this wasn't about space. It was about respect. About finally refusing to beg for crumbs at a table I spent decades building. I wasn't asking for a parade. I didn't need a toast. I just wanted to walk my daughter down the aisle. To matter. Enough. To be present. But since they decided I didn't belong, then maybe I didn't. And if being erased from their lives is what they chose, then I'd finally learn how to live mine without them. The cabin in Iceland was the kind of place the world forgot, tucked between jagged black lava fields and a half-frozen lake that never made a sound. Wind howled around the corners like it was trying to get in, but inside it was still. Just me, the crackling fireplace, and silence. After a lifetime of being needed but never appreciated, that silence felt like a balm. For the first 3 days, I didn't check my phone. Not once. No texts, no missed calls, no updates. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for one. I hiked across snow-packed trails with nothing but the crunch of my boots for company. I cooked simple meals, just eggs and canned soup, but it tasted better than any of Danielle's passive-aggressive casseroles. I didn't miss the noise, the constant questions, the expectation that I would fix everything while being told I was overreacting whenever I dared to have feelings. But on the 4th morning, I caved. Just for a second. I powered on the phone to check the weather. That's it. The screen lit up, and with it, the flood began. 10 missed calls from Veronica, my younger sister, 2 from Eloise, my niece, even 1 from Ava's soon-to-be in-laws. No texts from Danielle, of course, because she only ever calls when she wants to control the narrative. I stared at the notifications, eyebrows knitting tighter with each line. Something had gone wrong. There was no reason for Ava's fiancé's family to be calling me unless things were unraveling, and unraveling fast. A part of me wanted to listen to the voicemails, to feel needed again. But another part, the part Danielle and Ava helped carve raw, didn't flinch. I turned the phone off and tossed it back on the counter, where it slid a few inches before coming to rest next to the unopened bottle of whiskey I'd been saving. They didn't want me there. Not when it mattered. And now they wanted help? No. That bridge had been set on fire the moment they erased me from the guest list like I was just another inconvenience. I stood at the window, staring at the endless stretch of white outside. There were no decorations here, no flowers, no speeches, no choreographed dances. Just earth, ice, silence. And oddly, it felt more sacred than the wedding they didn't want me at. They'd chosen to cut me out. Ava let Danielle call the shots, and I let them both. That's the truth. I spent years telling myself that being quiet was being kind, that stepping back was love. But love isn't silent. Love doesn't delete you from the most important days of your child's life. I thought back to when Ava was 9 and begged me to watch her dance recital, how she ran off stage and into my arms afterwards because she'd spotted me in the crowd, back when I was the first person she looked for, back before she learned to roll her eyes at everything I said, before Danielle taught her that I was too much, too emotional, too fatherly for a modern blended family. And now she was crying somewhere, maybe, or panicking, or scrambling to undo whatever mess had just erupted at her wedding. I should have felt smug. I didn't. All I felt was tired. Tired of being needed only when things fell apart. Tired of being the glue that was never appreciated until everything cracked. And maybe I wasn't the one who cracked this time, but I wasn't going to be the one who patched it together either. That evening, I stepped outside, letting the snow sting my cheeks like tiny apologies. I walked to the edge of the frozen lake, its surface pale blue and glassy under the northern sky. My breath hung in the air, and I could see my reflection, just barely. A man standing alone. But for once, I didn't feel lonely. I felt honest. I sat on a bench carved out of rock and watched the sun dip low behind the mountains, casting gold and purple streaks across the ice. My phone was still off, my heart still sore, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back. Not to that role, not to that silence they forced on me. If they wanted me back in their story, they'd have to rewrite the ending. By the third day in Amalfi, I started to feel like I could finally breathe. The mornings were quieter, the espresso stronger, and the guilt that once clung to my chest began to loosen its grip. I'd been walking the steep stone paths above the coast when my phone buzzed, only once. Max, my brother-in-law. We hadn't spoken since the whole guest list debacle, but something told me to pick up. The line was fuzzy, his voice breathless. "Jared, man, you missed the circus," he said between gulps of air, like he'd just escaped a war zone. I leaned against a shaded wall overlooking the sea. "What do you mean?" He laughed, but not the funny kind. More like someone trying to process something insane. Eloise left the wedding. Like, full-on bolted in tears before the vows. And get this, her ex showed up. No one knows how he even found out, but the second she saw him, she froze, then turned around and walked out. The groom's mom, Mrs. Talbot, slapped Veronica. In front of everyone. Tables flipped, Jared, I swear. It was like a Greek tragedy with wine. I didn't say anything for a second. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because for once, I was completely speechless. Max filled the silence. I just thought you'd want to know. I mean, I know they didn't invite you, and I'm not saying that was okay, but dude, without you there, that whole thing fell apart like wet paper. He sounded stunned, but there was a tiny edge of something else in his voice. Respect. I swallowed hard, my hand tightening around the phone. I could almost see it. Eloise in her ivory dress, frozen at the altar, her eyes brimming with doubt and regret. Veronica, probably in her signature champagne silk, standing horrified while chaos erupted around her. And I wasn't there. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one rushing in to fix things. And yet, everything burned anyway. Funny. I always thought that if I stepped back, the world would collapse. And somehow that made me stay. But now that it actually had collapsed, I didn't feel guilty. I felt something else. Freedom. I walked further down the path, the sea wind brushing against my face, and let it wash over me. It was a strange thing, watching your whole identity disassemble like that. I wasn't their fixer anymore, not their buffer, their emotional punching bag, or their quiet, dependable glue. I was just Jared. And I liked him. Back at the villa, I poured myself a glass of limoncello and sat out on the terrace. The light bounced off the sea, throwing glitter across the waves. I raised my glass, not in celebration of their disaster, but in acknowledgement of my own rebirth. I used to believe that being left off that list meant I had no value. But now, with each call and chaotic story trickling in, it became clearer. I had always been the spine of that family. They just didn't see it until it bent away. Later that evening, Max sent me a photo. Eloise, in her dress, alone, sitting on a fountain edge with mascara-streaked cheeks. Around her, empty chairs, guests wandering, a cake untouched. Under the photo, he'd written, "This is what happens when the only grown-up isn't invited." I didn't laugh. I didn't send it to anyone. I just saved it. It was proof. Not of their failure, but of my liberation. That night, I made dinner with ingredients I picked up at the market. Olives, tomatoes, fresh pasta. I cooked for myself the way I used to cook for them. Except this time, I lit a candle, poured wine, and ate slowly, savoring every bite. No one asked me for seconds. No one interrupted with a meltdown. No one needed me to clean up a mess I didn't make. It was quiet, and it was glorious. As I sat under the stars, another call came in. This time from Eloise. I watched the phone vibrate on the table and let it ring. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally cared about myself more. She had made a choice, whether pressured or not, to exclude me from the most important day of her life. And now in the fallout, she was reaching for the man she used to depend on. But that man was on a break, and he might not be coming back. I didn't listen to the voicemail. Instead, I took a walk down the cobblestone path to the overlook above the sea. I sat there for an hour, watching the moonlight carve a silver trail across the water. Maybe one day I'd talk to her again. Maybe I'd even listen. But tonight was mine. That evening, the air felt softer, as if the wind had learned to exhale with me. After days of letting go, of untangling the knots Veronica and Eloise had wrapped around my spine for years, I walked into a small coastal tavern tucked into the edge of a cliff. The sun had just dipped behind the hills, painting the Amalfi sky in hues of lavender and gold. I didn't have a reservation. I didn't need one. The host smiled and waved me toward a table near the railing. That's where I met her. Freya. She sat alone at the neighboring table, sketching in a worn notebook with smudges on her fingers and a calm presence that didn't beg for attention. Her silver-blonde hair was tied in a loose knot, strands escaping with the breeze, and her eyes had that faraway look of someone who had traveled more than just physical miles. Our eyes met when the waiter accidentally dropped a fork between our tables. She smiled faintly. "Even the wind's in a rush tonight," she said, with a gentle Norwegian lilt. I laughed, the first real one in days. Or maybe it's just trying to get out of someone's way. She closed her sketchbook. "You look like you're running from something too." There was no malice in her tone, no prying, just observation. And oddly, it didn't bother me. "I'm Jared." I extended a hand across the gap. She shook it. Her palm cool, her grip strong. "Freya." She ordered lamb stew. I asked for the same. By the time the food arrived, we were deep into conversation. Not the shallow kind of, "What do you do?" or "How long are you here?" but something more honest. She was a sculptor from Oslo, spending time in Amalfi to recharge after finalizing a long, quiet divorce. 18 years, she said, swirling her wine, and for most of them, I was the one reminding him to breathe. That hit me in the chest. Because I knew that feeling. That slow erosion of self, masked as love. That quiet sacrifice that only gets noticed once it's withdrawn. I didn't unload everything. I didn't need to. She saw it in my silences, the pauses between my words, the way I watched the wine tilt in my glass instead of looking toward the glow of my phone. She didn't ask about the wedding. She didn't need to. Instead, she told me about the marble studio she missed in Oslo, how she once carved a woman out of a single block, then shattered it on purpose when she realized she was sculpting someone else's vision. "Sometimes destruction is the only path to creation," she said, her eyes steady on mine. I nodded. I used to be the glue, the one who fixed the messes, who kept the peace so no one had to face what they broke. Freya tilted her head. "And now?" I looked out toward the sea, the waves black and alive under the moon. In the past, being needed was the closest I thought I'd ever get to being loved. But Freya, her presence, her stillness, showed me something else. That being seen doesn't come from sacrifice. It comes from existing fully, without apology. It wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about making them regret excluding me. It was about learning that my worth was never tied to their recognition. Their mistake was not that they left me off the list. It was that they believed I would stay anyway. I didn't, and that made all the difference. When my flight touched down and I stepped out into the cool northern air, something inside me felt different. Not cracked or damaged, but rewired. I didn't rush. I didn't check for messages. I just walked with a steady gait to the parking lot, my suitcase wheels bumping along the concrete, no longer carrying the weight of resentment. The house was still standing, quiet, dim. There was no note on the door, no dramatic confrontation waiting for me, just stillness. Inside, it was emptier than I'd remembered. Veronica had moved out, clearly and cleanly. Her shoes were gone from the hallway. The vanity mirror she insisted on propping against our bedroom wall had vanished, and the endless clutter she left on the kitchen counters wiped clean. It was like she'd never been here at all. Only a single note was stuck to the fridge with a dull magnet. "Call if you're ready to talk." I read it once, then again. There was no apology, just an expectation, as if I were the one who needed to come crawling back. I folded the note, slowly and carefully, one crease, then another, and dropped it in the trash. No drama, just done. The silence in the house was different now. Not hollow or lonely, but open, full of space that I could finally breathe in. The next morning, I stood in front of the closet and stared at the suit, the one I'd picked out months ago for Eloise's wedding. I'd had it tailored, imagined what I might say if I gave a toast. I'd even practiced tying the perfect Windsor knot just in case she needed help. Now it hung limp, pointless. I took it down, folded it neatly, and drove it to a local charity shop. The woman behind the counter smiled when I handed it over. "Job interview?" she asked. "No," I said. "Just letting go." Later that week, I signed up for a photography course, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. Veronica used to say it was a waste, just another expensive distraction. But I didn't ask her for opinion anymore. That first evening in class, we practiced light balance on a still bowl of fruit. It should have been boring, but it wasn't. There was something almost meditative about adjusting the lens, changing my perspective, capturing beauty without having to fix anyone else's mess. I also joined a local hiking group. Every Saturday, we met at sunrise, strangers with coffee breath and weathered boots, and walked for miles through forest trails, up steep paths overlooking misty lakes. One woman brought her dog, another man always brought trail mix and offered it like communion. Nobody asked what I did for a living, nobody asked why I was there. We just climbed, together. One foggy afternoon, I stood at the top of a ridge overlooking the fjords. I raised my camera and snapped a photo, not staged or planned, just instinct. The frame caught it all. The water glinting under low clouds, the curve of the cliffs, the way the earth seemed to breathe below me. I posted the photo later with a caption that surprised even me. Turns out I wasn't invited to the wrong wedding. I was walking into the right life. The likes rolled in, but that wasn't the point. The point was, I meant it. For the first time in decades, I wasn't someone's fallback. I wasn't someone's fixer or buffer or ghost. I was just me. There were days when the old feelings crept back, like when I passed a bakery and remembered buying Eloise her favorite cinnamon rolls after her first breakup, or when I heard a song on the radio that Veronica used to hum under her breath while folding laundry. Those moments stung, sure, but they didn't pierce anymore. They reminded me I had once loved deeply, and now I was learning to love differently. About 3 weeks after I returned, I bumped into my neighbor, Mrs. Holtz, who always seemed to know too much. She looked me up and down with narrowed eyes. She said, "You look taller." I chuckled. "Must be the boots." "No," she said, tapping her temple. "You're just not shrinking anymore." That stayed with me. I wasn't shrinking anymore. I was standing. I was growing. One Saturday evening, after a long hike, I walked back home, poured myself a glass of red wine, and sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills. I didn't scroll through my phone. I didn't wonder if Veronica would call. I didn't wait for Eloise to text. They could reach out or not. Either way, I wasn't frozen in place anymore. I was building. slowly, quietly, steadily. And someday, if Eloise truly wanted to understand why her wedding crumbled under the weight of betrayal, if she genuinely wanted to know her father, not just the man who paid for dresses and drove her home from rehearsals, then I'd be here, ready to talk. But I wouldn't be waiting. That life, the one built around appeasement and omission, was behind me now. In its place was something simpler, clearer, stronger. Not revenge, not escape. Just freedom.
In the end, it wasn't the silence that healed me. It was the clarity I found inside it. For years, I thought my worth was tied to how much I could tolerate, how many wounds I could patch, how many holidays I could quietly make whole when no one else bothered. But Santorini, the cliffs, the salt air, the conversations I had with strangers and the ones I had with myself, all of it unraveled that lie. The truth is, love doesn't mean being invisible, and family doesn't mean accepting erasure. Eloise did eventually reach out again. Her message came late one night. "I miss you. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm sorry. You didn't deserve what happened." And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to rush in with comfort or an instant reply. I let the message sit, not out of spite, but out of care for myself and for the fact that healing, real healing, takes time. I thought back to the cliffs I walked, the sea that never demanded anything from me but showed up anyway, vast, unapologetic, whole. I remembered Serena's warm laughter on the beach, the way she didn't need anything from me but presence. That's what I wanted in my life going forward. Connection without condition, peace without apology. Eventually, I wrote back, "Thank you. I hope one day we can sit across from each other, not as people who hurt one another, but as people who learned. I love you, but I'm learning to love myself too." That's the lesson. That's the whole story. Not about weddings missed or apologies delayed. It's about finally realizing that the people who always assumed you'd be there have to know what it feels like when you aren't. Not to punish them, but to protect your spirit. And maybe, just maybe, the strongest kind of love isn't the kind that stays no matter what, but the kind that walks away when it's no longer seen. I don't know what the future holds for Eloise and me, but I know who I am now. I know what I deserve, and that's enough. So, wherever you are, if you're the one who's always held things together, the one who got left off the list, the one who's felt invisible in the spotlight of other people's lives, this is your reminder. You are not a placeholder. You are not a background character. You are the whole damn story. Take the trip. Say no. Be seen. And when you do, you'll find peace doesn't always come from being included. Sometimes it comes from choosing yourself. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been pushed aside by the people closest to you? Let's talk. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another story like this. We're building a space for truth, healing, and real conversations, one voice at a time.